Hi, to my esteemed viewers, I want to say welcome to this session. I also want to express my gratitude for you for your continued support, for you continuing to always be part of this channel, always trying to engage and also making sure that you benefit from it. My name is Baxter Ochieng. This channel is meant to teach quantity surveying and construction skills at large. And therefore, for those of you that are viewing and also watching, be rest assured that this is the channel where you get content relating to quantity surveying and also construction in a way that you'll not find in any other channel. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, because we need to move together and you need to get the videos as soon as they are put in place. I also want to mention that there have been those special requests where my viewers need that they are given customized attention in terms of areas of coverage and also specific assignments. The specific assignments which I offer include preparation of bills of quantities. You can also prepare for you schedule of materials and also schedule of labor. Anything related to quantity surveying consultancy and also construction supervision. And of course, there are also organized sessions of teaching where we do the teaching one-on-one at your most convenient time that you so choose. We always plan, and via Zoom or via Google Meet, we plan to have those sessions. And therefore, if you have those special requests or jobs that you like me to undertake for you, I can do them worldwide. Whichever part of the world you are in, just let me know and bring in the job. I do it for you in a way that you are going to be sure that you're going to get the value for money. So today, taking you back a little bit, we've been talking about the number of rules that are available in terms of the standard methods of measurements, and those that are used for you to make sure that you consider the rules in measurements, especially to the governing bodies that are meant for the quantity surveyors in their measurements. Of course, these rules, they vary from one place to the other, depending on the regions of the world where you are. For instance, this is now a book meant by that is made for the Eastern Africa. That is now the standard methods of measurements. So we've gone through the broad scope of that book, including so many items. But I felt it's wise that we consider now the specific items which are the most common ones that you will be dealing with in your day-to-day activities. And that is what has informed my opinion in making the summary of these rules, where we just prepare a table with the direct items which are occurring. Especially, we've now started with the substructure works. So we'll be doing the items that are in the substructure works at first, all possible items. So I've prepared, or we are going to make here a comprehensive list where we have substructure items, and we also have a section that is showing you which section of the standard methods of measurements those items are provided for, and also the specifications. Now those are the key items or the key descriptions that you always need to consider while doing your measurements. So I think it's very wise that we do so that whoever was digging in for the rules one by one can now have it even easier by having a summary of where these rules have been done just at once. Okay, so that is what brings us to our session today, and this is what we have prepared for you. Now, this is a comprehensive summary of the substructure elements, okay, of course in regard to the standard methods of measurements. So what we have is a list of the descriptions of the items, and another column where we are expressing the units. Now these are the units of measurements, what is going to be translated into your bills of quantities. And also then we have the standard methods section, the SMM section. Now this is the section that after this session that we are holding, when you search them from that given part, you are able to get that given reference. So this is just straight away meant to ensure that you have the straight on what you're looking for in terms of measurement. So it's quite impartial that we consider this. We do it so that the next session that we have, then it's now going to be an open, it's now going to be even easier, so that when you are trying to measure, always emphasize that it's important to my viewers and also my students across, that you always get to learn the rules, okay, the units of measurements, because when you do so, whenever you are presented with a plan, then it's always very, very easier for you to undertake the measurement of that plan, because you know that when you're talking about a given item, for instance cutting trees, then you know it should be done in numbers. So you simply know that if it's in numbers, then what are the criteria of identifying them as a tree. If you have done so, then it's also important for you that now you've measured them in numbers, so you are able to count them. If it's site clearance, it's square meters. These square meters, how do you arrive there? Of course, you now know that for square meters, the basic knowledge is that you will simply be looking into two dimensions, the length and the width. Once you have that, then you are good. That is why it's so important that we learn the units. Once we have learned the units, it's now very, very easier for us to undertake now the rest of the items that we need to measure. So here we go. We start from cutting trees. Cutting trees is done in numbers. So when it's in numbers, then we check from the section of the standard methods. We have D4A. From the D4A, then which are now the specifications of how to do this particular measurement. So you realize that when it's 600 millimeters, greater than 600 millimeters in girth, above the ground level, then in that case you identify it as a tree, and you now measure it in stages of 300. So the first stage, for instance, would be a group of 600 to 900, then 900 to 1200. So that is how you do that measurement. Then we go to site clearance. For site clearance, how do you do that? It's measured in square meters. For the square meters, what is it that okay, square meters. So we see from the square meters, what is also another crucial aspect that we need to consider. It's from the section of D4C, and then the specific rules that are guiding it include the bushes, scrub, undergrowth, and grabbing up roots. Now those are the specifics, what you need to consider when you are doing the site clearance. So of course for square meters, you just need to get dimension 1 and dimension 2. You get the areas. Depending on how you subdivide your plan, then you attain what is the final output that is needed in square meters. Then we have the topsoil excavation, also done in square meters, and then section where it's found is section D3. Now that is the sections of the standard methods of measurements, where you are going to find that given rule. Then we have, now whenever you are describing the topsoil excavation, you do it in square meters, stating the average depth, the average depth and the distance of the spoil heaps. So for instance, you want to just transport the topsoil excavation or the oversight excavation that you've removed from the site, and then you state of what thickness, for instance 150 millimeters thick, and then you also able to state to what distance are you transporting it from the construction sites. For instance, you say not more than 100 meters and so on. The reason of always being so much describing the items into finality is, you as a quantity surveyor, you are always describing the items to the final way in which they should be built. That is what the rule is stating. And also, all these items are normally cost implicative. So it means that whenever you leave anything out, then this document, it's not going to be it's not going to be helpful, because you are not going to express fully what is needed or how the work should be actually be carried out. Then to also make this work even easier, there is a section that I have done which is also able to show you some of these items. Okay, and the reason is, when you are able to figure out these items, how they appear in a typical section, then it's always easier for you to remember and also build up your taking off list by yourself. So in that order, you don't need to have all the items maybe written somewhere, but then instead you will be able to master or remember the items, because you have figured out how these items are always moving, or they are always done in place. Okay. Yes. So oversight excavation. From this given drawing that I made, it's at that given point, from that part that is highlighted. Okay. So of course, whenever you are doing your oversight excavation, you are going to do including the external spread of the foundation footing, for instance. So in that case, then even when you are getting the dimensions, then you need to get the dimensions to the external part. Okay. So for instance, when you have the plan like what is here, then it's always very crucial that, for instance, this is now a foundation plan. In this foundation plan, then you can see so clearly that this one here, let me just try to highlight. Okay, this part that is highlighted here, just when you are able to see that is now the wall. But then there are spreads, both the internal spread and the external spread. So normally when you are doing the, for instance, site clearance, you will always consider up to the external spread. And that is why when you look at the section here which I drew, then you realize that the wall is there, and then to the external spread you have the oversight. So of course you'll do it to any thickness, for instance 150 millimeters thick, as I had mentioned. So moving on, we've talked about the topsoil excavation. Moving on, we go to mass excavation. Mass excavation is done in cubic meters. It's done in cubic meters. So let's see from which section is that guided. From section D6 of the standard methods of measurements. Once that is, you've already identified that, and then we now see which are the specific items that you always need to remember. You need to know, one is that if it's greater than 300 millimeters thick, that is when you do it in cubic meters. For instances, when it's less than 300 millimeters thick, then you do it in square meters. Of course, stating the average depth. Then there are other items, okay, for the other part of that statement. For instance, basement, D5F applies. D5F is the section of this SMM which is talking about you having to measure the excavations in stages of 1.50 meters. So that is what that part is talking about. These instances where you might have the mass excavation include the instances that, for instance, you are having a black cotton soil, the soils which whose characteristics will compromise the stability of the building. And that means that when you have them, then you need to excavate all of them off the site. So when that happens, then you also need to know how do you go about that as the quantity surveyor. So for instance, in that case, then you need to measure them in cubic meters, especially when the thickness is greater than 300 millimeters. And when it's less, then you do it in square meters, of course stating the average depth. Then we move on and on, then we go to trench excavation. For trench excavation is also cubic meters, and you get that from D9, that is the section D9 of the standard methods of measurements. And also the rule states that in this case what you need to do is you building it, doing your excavations in cubic meters, and of course you conform to the rule of the D5F stating that you need to do your measurements in stages of 1.5 meters. Okay, in this case there is normally one thing that is quite confusing or give my students a difficult time. That is now the disposal and also the return fill and ram, or what you can call it backfilling. So let's look at this section which is also meant to make your work easier. So at the time when you are doing your excavation, then you've done the whole trench. Okay, so for instance, you did your site clearance. That is process 1. After doing your site clearance, then you've done the oversight, where you've just allowed for stripping of the topsoil, for instance 150 millimeters thick. So once that is done, then you realize that you now have, okay, from this point, from that point, so you realize that just beneath the topsoil, there's topsoil stripping that you've already taken away downwards up to the bottom of the footing, okay, or you can say bottom of the blinding. Once you do that, then you realize that you are always taking it so that it allows you to carry out the works at the substructure. So it means that given excavated material should be taken off. So you will always measure for disposal. So you do the excavation, you measure the excavation in cubic meters, and then you dispose. Okay, I told you that these items are so crucial because they are cost implicative. Disposal of the excavated materials is as expensive as excavation of the same. And so once you've done that, you do the disposal. But then there is always what we call adjustment. Okay, you can have now the backfilling on both sides. Okay, for instance, so if you have backfilling here at this part, and also on the inside, the internal spread, then what you do, if you have these two, then you are going to do what we call the backfilling. So at one instance, you've disposed the materials. Okay, you've allowed for the disposal theoretically, but then now in another time you are going to allow for this backfilling. So it means the total volume that you had disposed, you need to deduct the backfilling. Okay, so you need to deduct backfilling and add the filling. So you are deducting it from the disposal, which you had already done at first instance, and then you are now adding the filling to those given parts. So that is basically what you mean to when you talk about adjustment for the backfilling. So once that is understood, then we move straight to the next item, and that would be excavation for pits for column bases. So whenever you're doing for column bases, the rules remain the same, but then you get it from D10, and the stages, excavation in stages of 1.50 meters is constant. When we move to the excavating in rock, and that is got from D5E. Okay, it's talking about extra over. Okay, telling you that you measure it as an extra over item always when you are talking about the rock excavation, irrespective of depth. I'll always keep emphasizing and reiterating what I've talked about previously, that an extra over item would mean that these are items that you've talked about or you've measured in your previous working, but then now you are also measuring them, and the reason is they require special treatment, which means the cost implication is more than what is on the other, what you had captured in the previous item. So in that case, then that is why you measure them as an extra over item in regard to that particular rule. Then the next is disposal of water. So these are measured as items, so there is nothing much to say. D18A, and then always it's deemed to be inclusive of all the items, including pumping or any other means necessary to dewater the site at a particular time. Then planking and strutting, which is basically now support to the sides of excavations, and the reason is you are trying to prevent the materials returning back to the trenches or the pits that you've excavated. Reason 2 is also trying to prevent possible damage or possible injuries to the workmen. so that they are not hit back by the items that you've excavated and taken off the trenches or the pits. You want to see that, then you go to section D19 and the specific rules we just said, and that is it. Then we move next to concrete works. Concrete works, blinding is square meters, section F2, and when it's 300 millimeters thick, that is now the threshold. Beyond that, you can do it in cubic meters, or above that, you can do it in, beyond that is cubic meters, below that is in square meters, stating the thickness of that given blinding. So when you look at our section here, the one that I drew to make sure that it's even easier for us to understand, then you can see where the blinding is. Blinding is below the strip footing. Okay, so below the strip footing is where you have the blinding. That would mean whenever you have the length for your trench, that length should be able to be used also for your blinding, and of course times the width of that particular trench is just sufficient to give us what we need in terms of the area for the blinding. Yes, so the same state, of course it wasn't represented here in this section, but then it's still, yeah, of course it's there. I can see we have a blinding in this at that particular part, okay, where you have the 50 millimeters blinding. So blinding is an item, and we've seen how it's measured in terms of the summary that we are talking about. So we move straight to the next item, and that would be concrete footing. For the concrete footing, it's done in cubic meters. Section is F2C, and section 2FC, that is where it is, on where you can find it. And talking about footing, this is the footing that is described here, so that you understand what we mean. That is the footing, and it's measured in cubic meters. From the other drawing, it's also represented here just above the blinding. That is well noted. So we move to the next item. The next item is a column pad of the column bases, cubic meters as well. Then stab columns, so the foundation columns, cubic meters, found in section F10 of the standard methods of measurements. Then ground beams also in cubic meters. So for the beams, there is something worth noting, is that for the floor beams, they are always measured below the slab, in the sense that when you have that particular representation, then you shouldn't consider the beam from the bottom or from the soffit to above the beam, above the slab. So you measure it below the slab. That is what the rule is telling us to do. Then concrete bed is done in square meters, of course stating the thickness, and you find that from F7A. Okay, yes. Then reinforcement bars is in kgs. Considering the reinforcement bars, let's just go to take a look to our. This is how they are represented. For instance, in this section here, we have the main bar. That is now the bar that is bent, okay, with the turn-ups. The 31002. So that shouldn't worry you, because in our when we come to now take off our measurements, we'll go into those details in terms of interpretation of these annotations of the dimension bars and how now to measure them exactly on the plan. So you just stay put, because that time is coming. But for today, it's basically a summary of all the items we've covered, in terms of the rules and the sections where you find their measurements. Then we move on. We've talked about kgs. Section is F16B, and then we have not classifying the location. So whenever you are talking about the measurements for the reinforcement bars, you don't state that now it has to be in floors, or I mean, you don't have to specify for the footing or pad. You can always just talk about the reinforcement bars in terms of the diameters, but not necessarily in terms of the locations. But you can do so if you so wish, though it's not a requirement from the rule that you specify the locations in which those reinforcement bars are put. Then we have British reinforced concrete, that is now the BRC. Just put let's just take a look at what I have. So when you look at this expression or the drawing, then you realize that you have a BRC indicated in this point, okay, just below the slab. Of course, below the slab, immediately below the slab, because it's a reinforcement for meant for the slab in that particular place. So when you notice that, then it's even easier for you to understand that in this particular time, then you need to use the same area, because you do it in square meters, because you do it in square meters of the plan that you are provided with. Then it's from the section F17B, and you state the type, okay, and weight per 1 square meter, and the minimum length, minimum extent of side and end laps that are provided in that order. Then we have Damproof Membrane. For the Damproof Membrane, now that is the DPM. You want to get where the rule is stated, go to G97A. That is where the rule has been expressed. And then when it's greater than less than 300 millimeters wide, you measure it in meters. But if it's greater than 300 millimeters in width, then you do it in square meters. There is no allowance that you should give for the laps. Let those ones be allowed when they are ordering materials for them, for the contractor. So it's a little unfair, but that is the rule, because you will find that, I believe, in the history of such rules before it came to change or take effect in that manner, then when the allowance was given at the discretion of the contractor, then you realize that it wasn't going to be uniform, or rather every contractor would give his own or her own allowance in terms of those items that are lapping. So you'll find that the quantities would be more than what is supposed to be there. So that's why for the measurements, those allowances and the laps are not allowed. You do what we call net measurements. So we move to formwork. For the formwork items, of course, we are just talking about, for this instance, we are talking about the substructure works. So for the substructure works, there are a few instances where you find the formwork, and of course they have to be measured. So very first one, we are talking about the so-called, just skipped it here a bit. We are talking about the vertical sides of the foundation footings. Okay, so how do you measure that in terms of the units? So that one is done in square meters, as you can see there. And then the section is F20A Roman 4. So if you go to that specific section, then you will find out what we mean by in terms of the specification of the rule in terms of its measurement. To the vertical sides of columns, also in square meters, the same identification, the same section of the standard methods of measurements. For the other one is same section, but A at Roman 6, also stating square meters. Sides and surface of the ground beams, also square meters at Roman 4, of course F20A Roman 4. And then to edges of slabs, floors and landings and risers and the staircases, done in meters. So here we have a little bit of explanation. So when it's done in meters, then it needs to be also expressed in terms of the stages of measurements of the same. So when you're doing the stages, then its stages are conforming to in stages of 75 millimeters. So you do it in linear meters in stages of 75 millimeters. So that is what we have. So let's just take a little glance at what is also expressed in the drawing so that we see it even better. So the strip footing being down here, then now these formwork that we're talking about should be at the sides of the same. So you realize that we are going to do now the formwork to both sides of the foundation, strip foundation footing. So when you are talking about, for instance, you're talking about the mean girth, the mean length, then when you do it times 2, it should be cancelling out. So that is just an assignment to your side. Try to work at that out. For instance, now for one side and the other, you may add them, the two, okay, internal side and the external side. Alternatively, do the perimeter or the mean girth. When you do the mean length, then you should be able to, when you multiply by 2, it should be able to give you the same measurement in terms of the length. Well, then we move next to the walling. So let's see what walling is all about. Square meters, G4A, and the rule states that you measure the wallings in terms of in regard to the mean length and the average height. So the average height, even when you have a slanting wall, then you need to get an average height. Okay, that is what the rule is talking about. The mean length would mean that you do it at the center line if you're talking about the area for the wall. So it's as clear as that. Okay. Then bonding. Bonding is a special treatment where the walls, one wall connects to the other at the ends. So you measure it in linear meters, and then you state types of wall. Wall 1 to wall 2. Use the specifics. For instance, you are bonding wall of 200 millimeters wide to a wall of 150 millimeters wide. So in that case, you just need to specify which type of wall you are bonding to which one, and then you just measure that length, the point from where they connect to the end of the same. Okay. Then damproof course is in meters, linear meters. Then you state the width of the same. Earthwork filling. So we talked about this. So let's just see. From the expression from this drawing, I explained this just a moment when we were talking about earthwork filling. So you can have filling on either side. Have filling to the internal spread, that is now 1, towards the internal side of the building. Then you can also have a backfilling towards the external spread of the building. All these earthworks are considered and they are measured. And another backfilling can be here, especially now when you're now returning the topsoil that you had also excavated and taken off the site. So all those items are also provided for. Of essence is for us to know how they are done. Of course, here it's done in cubic meters, as that the rule is stating. D15C should give you what is staked about in that particular order. Then we talked about adjustment for the previous disposal. So you need to deduct this quantity. Once you have the backfilling to the sides, then you now need to deduct it from the disposal that you had measured when you are doing your general excavations for either trenches or the column pits for the bases and so on. Adjustment to topsoil excavation. So in this case, of course, we talked about excavating these materials and disposing them to a spoil heap a few meters away from the construction site for reuse, of course, when you need to reuse it for other items like landscaping and etc. So when you're doing this, then you need to make an adjustment because the soil that you've measured and you provided for it to be taken off the site, but then there's now another portion that you're now taking from the other side, from the spoil heap, you are bringing in to the sides, external sides of the foundation. So that is what that is talking about. Then next we are talking about hardcore bed filling. As usual, we try to bring it even more easier for you to understand. The hardcore bed is just below that. Of course, this is essentially to make up the level because you don't want to lay your slab at the ground level. So it's essentially you are doing hardcore filling bed to make up the level for you to lay your slab or concrete bed. for that case. So in this particular order, you can just see that is where it's located, and for you to measure it, it's in square meters. When it's 300 or less, okay, I explained that 300 is the threshold for this case. So when it's 300 mark, then you do it in square meters. Of course, the rule also explains that you need to state the stages in which you are doing such measurement. So if it's stages of 150, hardcore packing, and the quality of packing, on all those you need to state clearly. So it's in cubic meters when it's more than 300. When it's less than 300 millimeters thick, then you do it in square meters. Then we have form sinking and concrete thicknessing from a stage of section D20F, okay, and stroke F. The capital F is now the part of concrete works. That is now concrete works now will be guiding you how to measure the concrete thicknessing. Normally, form sinking is, you can see it from our drawing here. Normally, form sinking would mean you allow for removal of a portion of the hardcore, so that you fill it with, you thicken it with concrete, can be in mass concrete, just for an additional strength at that particular point. So that is what we are talking about in this particular discussion or particular section of measurements. So all that you allow for in measurement. So normally we'll see when you come to that, normally in other items, for instance, when you're doing staircase. So all those elements that will need an additional strength for support, so that you don't compromise the structural stability of the item that you are building, of the works that you are doing, then there is normally an allowance for the sinking, the removal of those forms, and also now thicknessing it with concrete at that particular order. So all that you do it in cubic meter, so that you see what you have in that place. Then we move on. We go to Maram blinding or stone dust blinding in square meters. Now, of course, these are now treatment to the surfaces of the hardcore. So we do it in square meters. So the rule is from D16A. Insecticide treatment is also in square meters. And then we go to the finishes. Okay. And moving straight to what we have here, we are finishing the plinth, and the plinth from the drawing can be shown in that area. Okay, the edge of the slab, and that edge, the side, you can call it the underside of the slab. Now that part of the wall that is exposed just slightly above the original ground level. So this particular drawing is able to show you that quite pretty well. So that said, that is now the area that you need to finish when you're talking about finishes to the plinth. So it's in square meters. Section is T4A, and then painting and decoration, of course, that is coming under the finishes. So that said, now we have a proper comprehensive list that is giving us all the items we need, all in summary, and what we need to focus on when we are doing our estimation. So this is now the very last theoretical part. Then the next, we are going to now take off our drawings in terms of substructure, so that we see what we are expressing, whatever that we've been explaining all that time. So that brings us to the end of our coverage today, the end of our discussion. I want to say thank you very much for watching up to this point, and I believe that it was worthwhile for having spent your time to watch and learn from it. So any question that you have, just put it in the comment section. When you go to my description of my channel, you can as well find all the contacts, my phone number, you can have the email address, Twitter handle, and so on, so that you reach me, I'm able to answer you properly at your most convenient time. The rates are very, very friendly. We are always going to agree. Of course, from the teachings, they can go from as low as $15 per hour. So once you have that, we organize our session, just communicate, we organize our session, and we have a session that you will really have the value for your money. So thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe before leaving because you need to grow together. Thank you very much. Bye bye.